I will take you, but not you. Oh, who am I kidding? I can't leave you.
Hello.
What?
Wait, hey, wait. Oh, wait, stop. Excuse me?
Nah. I was looking for, diversion!
What?
So long, sucker! Oh, I hurt all over.
Wait, I know you.
No, you don't. I get that a lot. I look like a lot of people.
No, I do. Bing bong! Riley's imaginary friend.
You really do know me?
Well, of course. Riley loves playing with you. You two are best friends. Oh, you would know. We're trying to get back to headquarters.
Headquarters? You guys are from headquarters?
Well, yeah. I'm Joy. This is Sadness.
You're Joy? The Joy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what the heck you doing out here?
That's a good question. You want to answer that, Sadness?
Oh, without you, Riley won't ever be happy. We can't have that. We gotta get you back. I'll tell you what, follow me.
Oh, thank you.
I love how this movie, Inside Out, it depicts our human emotions, joy and sadness. And in the movie Joy and Sadness, they're lost inside of a little girl. Her name is Riley, and they're trying to find their way back to headquarters. And so on their way back to headquarters, Joy and Sadness, they run into Bing Bong, Riley's imaginary friend. My question for you as we get going this morning is, which character in the little clip do you identify most with? Do you identify with joy, or do you identify with sadness? And some of you are thinking, I just identify with Bing Bong. But life wouldn't be the same if we didn't have some Bing Bongs in the room, right? We all need a Bing Bong in the family. You know, it seems that as we get older, as we become adults, and as we graduate from college and we get married and maybe you get a job, our joy seems to fizzle out. It seems to leave and we have less joyful days, right? It seems to just dissipate. I recently read this statistic and it said this. It said that the average 4-year-old laughs 300 times a day, and the average 40-year-old laughs only 4 times a day. That's a sad statistic and a shocking statistic, isn't it? So what I want to do as we get going this morning is I want everyone to do an exercise, but it's a technology exercise, so you don't have to get up. You can stay seated, but go ahead and pull out your phones. Everyone has to participate. You can't stay in the sermon if you don't. Everyone has a phone, so pull it out. Keep it close to you, though. I don't want the person next to you seeing what you're going to write down. So don't let your spouse see, don't let your kids see. This is just for you. So pull up your notes app or somewhere where you can write in your phone. And you're going to write down one number. So on a joy scale, on a scale of 1 to 10, how joyful are you feeling this morning? So we'll say that on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is you're on the beaches of Hawaii, maybe you're in Maui, your feet are kicked back in the sand, you're in one of those reclining chairs, and you got a good book that you've been waiting to read, and you got a cold Coca-Cola in your hand. You're going to go parasailing this afternoon. Life is good. That's a 10. A 1 is you're driving through the desert of Yuma. Your car breaks down, and you're coming back from vacation. We'll say that's a 1 on the joy scale. Where are you at this morning? Write down a number, put it down, and that's how joyful you're feeling right now. You can go ahead and put your phones away. You see, maybe your number is lower than you thought it would be, and maybe it's just been that way for a while. Maybe you've been going through a very sad season, or maybe you've been going through a depressing season of life. Maybe something has happened to you or a friend or a family member. Depression is running rampant in our society and in our culture. And maybe you have some friends or a family member that's struggling with anxiety or depression. It's a very real thing in our country and in our world right now. I know I have lots of friends struggling with anxiety. So it's not uncommon. The Bible speaks to this in the Proverbs. Solomon writes this in Proverbs 18:14. The human spirit can endure sickness, but a crushed spirit, who can bear? You see, if you're struggling with stress or anxiety, or maybe you've been struggling with depression, that's okay. You can go on stressed for a season. You can go on worried and anxious for a season, a couple of months. That's okay. The human heart can bear that for a time. But if that goes on for a few months, if that goes on for a few years, that turns into depression. And if you know someone who's been struggling with depression, if you know someone in your family who's been depressed, or if you've personally struggled with depression, you know that's not a good thing. It's what? A crushing feeling, isn't it? I know many people who have been depressed and have felt suicidal, and it's crushing on a family. It's crushing on you personally, isn't it? And that's why I think the Bible says it gives you a crushed spirit. God doesn't want you to live a crushed life. He doesn't want your kids to go through life crushed. He wants you to live the opposite of that. He wants you to live a very joyful life, a full life, the opposite of crushed. And so we're going to look at that this morning. What does it mean to have a life full of joy? And I believe each of us can choose joy. We're going to look at 3 habits this morning. And I believe if you begin to form these 3 habits, then you can choose joy each morning that you wake up. That your joy is a choice. In Habakkuk, we've been reading about his prayer in chapter 3. We're going to look at the last 3 verses of Habakkuk's prayer in chapter 3. In 3:17, that's where we'll be at this morning as we begin. It says this. Habakkuk 3:17, it says, "Though the fig tree does not bud, and there is no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though the flocks disappear from the pen and there are no herds in the stalls, yet I will rejoice. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation." You see, Habakkuk has every reason to be anxious. He has every reason to be stressed out and worried. He has every reason to complain about his circumstances and his situation. He has every reason because everything is going wrong in his life. Yet he will choose to rejoice. And this is the first habit of a joyful person. You must choose to rejoice, even though everything in your life is going wrong. Things at home with the kids, they're not as you thought they'd be. Your relationships are bad. My marriage isn't going as I thought it'd be, yet I will choose to rejoice. My job, it's not working out like I thought it would, yet I will choose to rejoice. Our finances, I don't have as much money as I thought I wanted, or we don't have any money right now, yet I will choose to rejoice. Not as healthy as I thought. That was a bad medical report. It's actually terrible. My mom is really sick, yet I will choose to rejoice. You get the point? Your joy has to be a choice. And it was the same for Habakkuk. A lot of times you have to smile despite the circumstances that you find yourself in. And sometimes it's what? So easier said than done. I don't want to smile. I don't feel good today. I actually feel terrible. I feel kind of depressed right now, right? That's what you think a lot of the time. Yeah, I'm going to choose joy despite how bad these relationships are, despite how much my boss, he stinks, and I hate the people I work with. I will choose joy despite all of these circumstances. I recently heard a story about one of the first famous comedians. He was living on the East Coast. His name was Joey Grimaldi. And this was the early 1800s. Joey Grimaldi had a famous talent at turning angry mobs into applauding audiences. And Joey Grimaldi, he had a string of shows coming up in New York City. And so he was getting ready to go to New York City. And as he got there, he was feeling quite ill. So Joey booked an appointment with a doctor. And he gets to the doctor's office. And it was a doctor he had not seen before. So he walks into the office. And the doctor starts giving him a physical and examining him and looking at him. And the doctor, at the end of the examination, he says, "You know, sir, I don't quite know what you do for a living, and my prescription for you is this. I suggest you take some time off of work, if possible, and go relax with your family. It might do you some good. And, you know, my second prescription for you is this as well. There's a famous comedian in town this week. Everybody's raving about him. His name's Joey Grimaldi. You should go see him because some smiling and laughing would really do you good, sir." And so Joey looked at the doctor and he said, "But doc, I am Joey Grimaldi." Joey went on to go do those shows in New York City that week. And 2 weeks later, he died. It's sad. But Joey You see, he had a problem, but he had a gift. He had a gift at turning angry mobs into applauding audiences. He had a gift at giving everybody in the room joy, at giving everybody in the room laughter and smiles. But his problem was that he couldn't take it a step further and choose joy for himself. He couldn't accept the doctor's orders and just smile and choose joy for himself. He was what most people would call a workaholic, a perfectionist. He was always trying to make his sets better. He was always trying to take it one step further. He could never stop, relax, and pause and just be joyful and be in the moment. The Bible speaks to this in Philippians 4:4. We read this verse. It says, we read that one. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Now, if you've been in church before, or if you've grown up in Sunday school, or maybe this is one of your first times in church, I bet you've heard this verse. This is a very common Bible verse, but it's also commonly ignored, isn't it? Because maybe you read it and then you go, oh, that's a nice verse, but it's not for me. But here's the unique thing about this Bible verse. You see, there's lots of commands given in the Bible, but they go like this. We'll look at some 10 commandments, for example. Don't commit murder. But it doesn't say, don't commit murder. I'll say it again, don't commit murder. It doesn't say that. Or we'll look at another one. Don't commit adultery. I'll say it again, don't commit adultery. It doesn't say that. It just says it once. The unique thing about this Bible verse is it says it twice. Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again. Rejoice. So there is emphasis on it. There must be something uniquely important about it. But you read it and you go, oh, that's a good Bible verse. That was a good devotional I read this morning. For my neighbor, that's why she's always so joyful. But if she had 4 kids like us, she wouldn't be so joyful. If they didn't have any money like us, they wouldn't be as stressed out. I could have more joy like them if I drove a Tesla. But you get the point? Joy is so hard to choose sometimes. But this is a command, and it's given twice. It's doubly important. I was thinking about a prescription to give, and I thought we should pull out our phones, and next to those numbers you wrote down, you should keep a log, a laughter log. If you're only laughing 4 times a day, try to up it. Maybe write 5. I wrote 6. I laughed 6 times a day. I should up it to 7 tomorrow. I should laugh 9 times tomorrow because I'm a miserable person. I laughed 1 time today. Need to hang out with some more teenagers. My second prescription for you is this. Pray. Joyful people choose to pray, and that's our second habit of the joyful person. I think if you're thinking of a joyful person, if someone's coming to mind, maybe it's a parent you know or a person in this room, maybe it's someone at church, maybe if it's one of your neighbors, I will wager with you they have a very strong prayer life. When we look at Habakkuk, and we looked at him last week, what is chapter 3 called? It's called Habakkuk's prayer. So when we look at Habakkuk 3:19, the final verse, we see Habakkuk praying, and it reads like this. The Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer, and he enables me to walk on mountain heights. You see, the enemy army, the Babylonians, they were closing in on the Israelites, and things weren't looking good. This enemy army would come and kill, steal, and destroy, and they would take everyone captive, kill most of the men. So Habakkuk should be stressing out and having lots of anxiety, but Habakkuk decides, I'm going to pray, I'm going to ask God for strength, and I'm not going to worry about the situation I find myself in. I'll ask God for strength, and I'll ask him to take care of it. One of the things that I've noticed as I've gotten older is that we have some great Christian leaders in this country. And when our nation finds ourselves in times of distress, when we find ourselves in times of our uncertainty, our great Christian leaders, they go to God. They pray for strength and they pray for his protection. I don't know if you've noticed that either. I think about the American Revolutionary War. when the British were invading. It was 1777, and it was a cold winter. Historians say this was possibly the coldest winter during the war. And so the British had invaded down the East Coast, and they had taken Philadelphia, which was a stronghold at the time. This was a critical city to have. And so the British come and they take the city, and General George Washington, who was leading the Americans at the time, he had about 12,000 men left. He was in a dire situation because a lot of his men, they didn't have the proper clothing, they didn't have jackets, a lot of them were going without shoes, and they were going hungry. They said historians say this is a critical point, they're about to lose the war. He has to take his men up a ridge, up a plateau, to a new place to find refuge where they can fight from. And he goes to a place called the Valley Forge. So as they get to the Valley Forge, they come to a place and they don't have any shelter. So he commands his men, start building shelters. So they build these little 12 by 16 foot huts. And as they build these huts to live in, another thing happens. Typhus breaks out, illness, 2,000 to 3,000 men die like that. He's on the brink of disaster. It doesn't look good. He's writing back to headquarters saying, we need help. We're dying. We're going to lose this war. It's inevitable if you don't send more help. So all the men are dying. And one morning, a man who's living on a property nearby, he owns an iron mill. He's on his horse. He's going out to greet some of the men. And he's going through the woods. And he's in the snow and he hears something. He hears a noise. Maybe it's some of the soldiers. And he gets closer and he ties up his horse to a tree. And he keeps walking because he hears some crying, some yelling. And he comes over behind the trees and he sees a man on his knees. And it's the great General George Washington crying out to God, yelling, praying for a miracle. That God would deliver the Americans, that God would give them victory, that God would protect them, that God would just answer his prayer. And I don't know about you, but as I look around, we're having church in America right now. You see, that man, he went back to his house and he snuck off and took his horse back to his house and he looked at his wife and he said, because here's the ironic thing, he looked at his wife and he said, I just seen the most amazing prayer I've ever seen. And we are no longer, they were sending at the time supplies to the British. They were sending food to the British. They were supporters of the British. But we're now going to support the Americans. I've seen the most amazing prayer ever. And God will surely answer that man's prayers. And I think God did answer that man's prayers. In John 10:10, we read this. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and to destroy. You see, when there was a thief coming and an army coming to steal and to kill and to destroy the Americans, General George Washington, I'm sure he was a bit stressed out. I'm sure he was anxious. I'm sure he was worried. But he chose to pray. He chose to pray to the God of all armies for protection. For you and I, for each person in this room, we have an enemy army. But your enemy army is not one of flesh and blood. Our enemy army is a spiritual army. It's arguably the greatest army. And it comes up against us each and every morning and each night. And it wants to come and steal, kill, and destroy your joy. And for most of us, our joy has been gone and it's been stolen and it's been robbed. And that's why you're feeling anxious and worried and depressed and stressed. And if you've been depressed or worried or anxious for a long period of time, that enemy is winning. So my question to you is this. What are you doing to protect that joy? And if your answer is, well, I hope it gets better, I pray that you have a better answer than that. Because your answer needs to be, I'm getting on my knees and praying that the God of all armies protects my joy, that the God of all armies will deliver me and give me joy. You need to stop being stressed out, by praying to the God of all armies and choosing to pray in the midst of all of your situations, in the midst of that stress, in the midst of that distress, in the midst of that worry, and he will deliver you. I don't know about you, but I have had some stressful situations. I've had some anxious situations, and I think everybody has gone through some periods where they've just felt worried. Some weeks that have just felt bad, and you felt like you just had the weight of the world on your chest, sick to your stomach type feelings. And I was getting ready to propose to my now wife, and that's a very stressful time. And when I was getting ready, I was 7 days away, but I didn't have the two things that every guy needs to propose. So the first thing you need is this. You need a ring. I did not have that. The second thing you need is her father's permission. I did not have that. So we're 7 days away, and I don't have those two things. So I'm at her house, and it's the weekend, and I look at her and I said, hey, I had a great plan. I said, hey, babe, so on Monday, we should do that paddle boarding adventure up the river that you've always wanted to do. And she's like, I don't want it. You've always wanted to do that. And I was like, oh, yeah. Anyway, I already booked the Groupon. It's on Monday. So you're going to have to take work off. And she's like, I'm not taking work off. I'm like, take work off. Groupons are not refundable right now. So you better take work off. I'll take work off. It's going to be great. So the nice part was the paddleboarding adventure was right next to the jewelry store, killing two birds with one stone. I show up to the jewelry store. I tell the jeweler, I need this ring in 3 days. And she goes, yeah, it'll be ready in 5 days. I'm like, I'm leaving for New York in 3 days. This better be ready. So I walk out to the car, and I look at my phone, and I say, okay, I got to text her father now. So I get ready to send a text message, and I said, hello, sir. Can I ask you a very important question tonight at 7 p.m.? And his text message back to me was this. Yes, please have the following financial documents ready and sent over. He's an executive at Chase Bank. He said, please send me your credit score, all banking and savings statements, all student loan documents, any other necessary financial documents. And I thought, what the heck is a credit score? So I grabbed my phone, and I'm like making the one phone call I know how to make. I call my buddy Chris, who majored in business finance. He's working at a biotech hedge fund. I say, Chris, what's a credit score? I need help right now. Chris is like, I don't think you should be proposing, man. But I'll help you, and I'll have those documents over to you by 6:45. I was like, you are the man. I owe you lunch. And he's like, save your money. So I get over to the paddleboarding place, pick up my girlfriend, and we're out on the water, and my prayer that whole day is, God, just open up this river like the Red Sea, split it wide, throw me at the bottom, close it up, let her paddle off so that I don't ever have to get on the phone with her dad. I was so anxious. I didn't want to have that phone call. And I'm so worried, and I'm getting a headache, and I just can't think right. And at the end of the day, we return the paddle boards, and we're going back to her apartment, and she's like, hey, do you want to get some Chipotle? And I'm like, yeah, whatever, sure. So we go and we're eating the Chipotle at her apartment, and I'm like, hey, I'm feeling pretty sick right now. I think it's the salmonellas. You know, Chipotle has the salmonellas here. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's salmonellas. I gotta go. So I get in my car, and I book it back to my little graduate dorm room I'm living in at the time. And I grab my phone, and sure enough, my buddy had sent over all the proper documentation. And I'm like, I have a credit score. So I call her father, and I said, sir, I have one final question for you. What's your email? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, I have to send over all the documents. And he said, son, I was kidding. I said, you gotta be kidding me right now. And he said, what did you want to ask me? And I said, can I marry your daughter? He said, of course you can marry my daughter. We love you. I said, I love you too. He said, Sue and I, my wife and I, we love you and we love your family. I said, oh, you're the best. You see, that day I chose to worry. I chose to get all anxious and all bent out of shape that day. And it really ruined that day. And I wrote this down as the third habit of the joyful person is that you choose to have faith. I should have known who my father-in-law was. He was a good father. He was a good father to his daughter. He was a good father to his wife. He was a good father to his employee. He had been a good father to me. And I couldn't remember that. I couldn't think about that in the moment, and I got all stressed out. In Hebrews 10:38, we read this: "My righteous ones will live by faith." You see, that day, instead of choosing faith and choosing to remember who my father-in-law was and how he had always been to me and how he had always treated me, I focused on my anxieties. I focused on what had been weighing me down. And I missed one of the best days with my soon-to-be fiance. I missed a beautiful day out on the Columbia River because I was focusing on my anxieties. We didn't even get a picture together to remember that moment. It was so sad. For each of us, how many of you have been focusing on your anxieties, focusing on those stresses, focusing on that depression, and you missed a beautiful day with your spouse? You missed a trip with your kids because you were so worried about what was going on at work. You were so worried about fill in the blank. You see, you can have faith that your good father has good things planned for you, or you can choose to focus on your anxieties and your stresses and let that block the joy in your life. Go ahead and pull out your phones. Look at that number that you wrote down when we first started. This phrase has been coming to me over and over this week. And the phrase is this: level up. Choose to level up. What I want you to do is I want you to write a number next to that old number. If you wrote down 5, write down 7. If you wrote down 7, write down 9. If you wrote down 3, write down 4. And for each of us, as we write down those numbers, you're going to have to choose to level up in this new season that we're entering into. This season of joy, this season of thankfulness, this season of hope. Make this a new season for you and for your family. Choose joy each morning as you wake up. Choose to pray for that joy and choose to pray for this number. Choose to strive for this number. Each evening when it's hard, even on those hard nights when it's difficult and you don't feel like it, and when you get home and things are hard with your family and with your job, choose to pray for that joy. Choose to pray for this number. Don't let it go by. Don't miss a day. And if you're feeling those feelings of anxiety and stress, and if you've been feeling like you're down in the dumps and really low and struggling with suicide or depression, like Brother Clayton here, like you just can't get by, like joy is something that might be impossible right now, have faith that your joy is still there, that your good Father has good joy planned for you and a good future planned for you. Let's go ahead and pray. God, my prayer for us as a church this morning is that even when the enemy camps around us and shoots arrows of anxiety and arrows of despair and arrows of depression and arrows of despair, I pray that we put up shields of faith and shields of prayer so that you can rain down joy on us, so that we can walk out as ambassadors of joy to our friends and family. We pray these things in your Son's name. Amen.